Have you ever imagined a conversation that never actually occurred? No, not just a passing fantasy or thinking for a few seconds about something that might happen. I am talking about those moments when your mind constructs an entire scene. The exact words, the reactions of others, the perfect response you should have given, the conversation you would have if you were to meet that person again. And when you realize it, 10 or 20 minutes have passed and you have been in another place without moving from your spot. It can happen in the shower, while you are driving, before going to sleep, or even in the middle of a meeting. Your body remains present, but your mind is busy living something that does not exist. And the curious thing is that most people do not talk about this because from the outside it looks like a simple distraction, but from the inside it feels different. It feels as if you had a second life, a life that only exists in your head. And today we are going to explore the psychology of people who constantly imagine fake scenarios. Because what seems like a simple mental habit may be revealing something much deeper. Our brain has an extraordinary capacity. It can travel to the past, it can anticipate the future, and it can create complete situations without the need for them to actually occur. In fact, much of the time our mind is generating simulations, rehearsing possibilities, remembering experiences, and imagining results. It is a normal function, and it is also useful. Thanks to it, we learn from our mistakes, we prepare for difficult situations, and we can plan for the future. But in some people, something curious happens. The simulation stops being an occasional tool and becomes a habitual refuge. The mind begins to prefer the imagined world over the real world, not because the person is disconnected from reality, nor because they confuse fantasy and reality, but because within those scenarios they find something that is harder for them to achieve outside: control, understanding, security, and emotional resolution. Think about it. In an imaginary conversation, no one interrupts you and no one misunderstands what you want to say. You can explain exactly how you feel. You can find the perfect words. You can make the other person finally understand your point of view. This is something that in real life rarely happens because people are unpredictable, conversations are chaotic, and reality follows no script. Imagination does. That is why many people return again and again to those mental scenarios, because there they can experience emotions without assuming the risks that real relationships imply. They can rehearse, correct, repeat, and rewrite the story. And although this may seem strange, it makes a lot of sense from a psychological point of view. Many times those imaginary worlds are born to cover emotional needs that at some point did not find enough space in reality. Perhaps the person grew up feeling misunderstood. Maybe they learned that expressing certain emotions was not safe, or they simply discovered that imagining was easier than exposing themselves. With time, the mind learns something important. It learns that it can obtain emotional relief without depending on anyone else. And that becomes incredibly attractive because real relationships involve uncertainty. People can disappoint you, they can reject you, or they can fail to understand you. But imaginary scenarios are always available. They always work exactly as your brain needs. And there appears one of the most interesting aspects of this phenomenon. Many of the people who constantly imagine fake scenarios usually have an especially intense emotional life. Not necessarily more dramatic, just more intense. These are people who dive deeply into what they feel, who connect deeply with music, with movies, and with stories. People who can stay thinking for hours about something that goes unnoticed by others, not because they are weaker, but because they process experiences in an especially deep way. And when a mind has that capacity for emotional investment, it also usually has an enormous capacity to build internal worlds. That is why this behavior is not always related to artistic creativity. There are very creative people who hardly do it, and people who have never written a story who spend hours imagining complex situations. What matters is not the creativity, it is the ability to be completely absorbed in a mental experience, to feel it as if it were happening, and to live it emotionally. And here an interesting paradox appears. The more relief the imaginary world provides, the more difficult it can be to return to the real world. Because reality demands things that imagination does not: patience, vulnerability, and action. In fantasy, you can have the perfect conversation. In reality, you have to dare to start it. In fantasy, you can receive immediate understanding. In reality, you have to accept that it might never come. In fantasy, everything fits. In reality, almost nothing does. And that is why some people end up using these scenarios as a kind of automatic emotional refuge. Every time stress, loneliness, or frustration appears, the mind opens the door and enters again. The complicated part is that many times this generates a strange feeling afterward, as if time had disappeared, as if a part of the day had evaporated. And then a certain guilt arises, the feeling of having been absent, of having wasted time, or of living more inside the head than outside of it. But here is something important to understand. Imagining fake scenarios does not mean there is something broken inside you. In fact, many times it happens precisely because your mind found a clever way to protect you. It was an adaptation, a strategy, a way to give you what you needed when you did not know how to get it elsewhere. The problem is not that this inner world exists. The problem appears when it becomes the only place where certain needs can be satisfied, because then imagination stops complementing reality and starts replacing it, and that difference changes everything. Perhaps the most important question is not how much time you spend imagining. Perhaps the real question is something else. What exactly is that scenario giving you? What do you find there that you find hard to find outside? Is it understanding, security, recognition, or connection? Because many times the content of our fantasies reveals real emotional needs, needs that are still waiting for attention. And understanding them can be much more useful than trying to eliminate the fantasies completely. In the end, the ability to build entire worlds inside your mind is something extraordinary. It is a sign of emotional depth, of imagination, and of sensitivity. The point is not to stop imagining. The point is to make the things that only exist in your head start to exist in your life as well. Because maybe the real problem was never that you imagined too much. Maybe it was that, for a long time, you felt that some parts of you were only safe when they remained hidden. And if you have recognized yourself in all of this, maybe you don't need to fix anything. Perhaps you only need to understand why your mind built that refuge, and ask yourself if you still need it in the same way as before. If this exploration of the mind has changed the way you view your inner world, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the psychological history that often remains buried. Plant the seeds for your future. The next treasure of the mind will be opened soon,